Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the keynotes. A few reminders: if you have a chance, please fill out the surveys in the app. It's great learning for us, and if you complete 6 of them, you're eligible for a prize at Swag Central. Another reminder, after this session is the welcome reception, main hall. Eat, drink, visit sponsors, and there's going to be some fun surprises. So hopefully you can join us after this session for the welcome. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Please welcome Zoe Brommer.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying, the end of a long day. I'm Zoe Brommer. As I guess you already know, I work for the Institute for Security and Technology, which is a Bay Area-based nonprofit. We're focused really on designing and advancing solutions to the world's toughest emerging security threats. Most of those, or all of them, have to do with technology. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. My portfolio at IST covers a range of issues that focus mostly on areas where cybersecurity practices and the cyber threat landscape intersect with government and economic policy. One of those projects is the Ransomware Task Force. I'm the lead researcher on the task force, and I'm here today to talk to you about what has become 2 years of research, mapping the ransomware payment ecosystem and developing a mini pilot to sort of test the validity of that theoretical map. So I'm really excited to tell you all about my research today. All right, so first, just a little bit about the Ransomware Task Force. IST convened the Ransomware Task Force in early 2021 in order to bring together professionals from a range of different sectors to talk about the ransomware threat and to try and design some solutions to address the threat. So the task force is made up of over 60 experts. I think at this point it's probably more than that. But these experts include representatives from industry, so technologists, government personnel, law enforcement folks, and representatives from civil society and international organizations. And we really wanted to tackle this threat from a multi-stakeholder perspective. And the reason for that is that, as you've heard in presentations all day today, I'm sure, lots of different folks have visibility into really unique pieces of the ransomware ecosystem. They have a unique set of tools, depending on sort of the industry that they fall into. And so we wanted to bring all of those folks together to design like a really systemic, to tackle the threat at a systemic level and really try and get to the bottom of it. Ultimately, we published our inaugural report in April. It outlined 48 recommendations to tackle the ransomware threat, and it was published just 1 month before the Colonial Pipeline attack, which I guess you might call good timing. I don't know. So the RTF is designed around 4 key pillars. Those are to deter ransomware attacks, to disrupt the ransomware business model, to help organizations prepare for attacks when they do happen, and to help those organizations respond to them more effectively. IST and the Ransomware Task Force has published a range of different products around these 4 frameworks. A couple of those include the Blueprint for Ransomware Defense, which is a curated subset of the Center for Internet Security's Critical Security Controls, which is a mouthful, but there you go. And those are really selected to help small and medium-sized enterprises defend themselves better against the ransomware threat to increase that baseline cybersecurity level. We also put together, with the help of CTA, which is the Cyber Threat Alliance, something called the CIRF, Cyber Incident Reporting Framework, which is to help governments design reporting requirements within their own jurisdictions around cyber incidents. So that includes a set of principles and also an appendix with actual information fields that we feel are most important. But what I'm here to talk to you about today is the second pillar, which is disrupting the ransomware business model. And I want to pause for a moment to talk about why. So as you've heard earlier today, and as you maybe already know, ransomware is ultimately a financial crime, right? So folks carry out ransomware attacks in order to make money. And in order to dismantle this threat at scale, it's really important for us to figure out how to disincentivize actors, sort of at a broader level. And one way to do that is by making it less profitable for them to carry out attacks. So when I came into this research, as a researcher, my feeling was that the first and most important thing was to understand the existing problem. And when I started doing research, we had a pretty general idea of what happened after a ransomware attack occurred in terms of following money through the ecosystem. We understood it to be essentially these 6 steps. So ransomware attack, then a period where the ransom payment is negotiated, then the ransom is paid, and then threat actors work to obfuscate those profits. This is essentially money laundering. I will get into this in a bit more detail later on. After obfuscation, actors cash out a portion of their proceeds, so this involves off-chaining or moving cryptocurrency into fiat currency to spend in the traditional financial ecosystem. And then the other portion of the ransomware proceeds are generally reinvested into the enterprise during the resourcing phase. And while this is, a useful starting point, it really was not enough information, I felt, for us to design disruptive opportunities. So I turned to the task force to try and build out this basic understanding. I know this is really small. Before you reach for your glasses, I'm going to zoom in on portions of this in a moment, but just wanted to give folks sort of a couple of overlying points. So this is essentially the really simple cycle that you just saw in more detail. The colors are not random. Everything in green that you see here is a regulated entity, and everything in yellow is either under-regulated or under-resourced. Also of note is that any of the dotted lines you see indicate escrow. I'm pretty sure that's impossible to see in this, but anyway. Okay, so let's begin. So I'm going to zoom in now on the first half of the cycle, which are the fiat transactions and on-chaining. So if we start on the left with a ransomware attack, that's the red triangle, after a victim is attacked, they generally will contact their, either they'll contact like a digital forensics or an incident response firm. And the purpose of that is to help with all of the next steps. So the victim or an organization on the victim's behalf will reach out to a depository institution, which is normally a bank, in order to begin the process of acquiring cryptocurrency. Most victims do not have enough cryptocurrency to pay ransoms on hand. In cases when they do, they can just skip sort of this whole section. You can see that in the V-shaped line on the bottom there. But in most cases, these actors have to acquire that currency. So the victim will contact their depository institution, and using either a wire transfer, an automated clearing house, or a credit card, they will transfer money to a VASP, which is a virtual asset service provider, which will provide cryptocurrency to the victim and place it in a wallet owned by that victim. Okay, at this point, the ransom is paid. Very self-explanatory slide. But the currency will move from a wallet owned by the victim to a wallet owned by the ransomware actor. Okay. Once the wallet is in the hands of these threat actors, they begin the process of obfuscation. And I want to pause for a moment to talk a little bit about obfuscation. So there's a trope that I hear a lot, which is that cryptocurrency is anonymous. And that's actually not quite right. Cryptocurrency is pseudonymous, which means that while you don't have to provide like a ton of identifying information in order to create a wallet or acquire cryptocurrency, all cryptocurrency transactions are recorded on a blockchain, which is an immutable ledger. And there are entire sort of sectors that have come about that analyze this blockchain. You heard from some of them earlier today. So blockchain analytics folks and at this point, law enforcement are able to trace the history of transactions on the blockchain, and with enough time and resources can often trace that history back to an identity. This is a nightmare for threat actors, and so they work very hard to make it difficult for blockchain analytics folks to identify them. They have a range of ways of doing this, outlined in this oblong rectangle here. Actors can use exchanges, so centralized exchanges, peer-to-peer exchanges, and high-risk exchanges to essentially transfer between types of currency or trade currency with other users. And what this does is it allows the history to move from one blockchain to another blockchain, which requires analysts to make that jump as well. Threat actors can also use merchant services, which are just sort of like secure payment mechanisms. They can use mixers, so cryptocurrency mixers essentially operate like traditional money laundering when you think about it. So they merge transactions from a bunch of different cryptocurrency users into a single transaction and then break it back out again into a set of wallets. And what that does is it sort of scrambles the history of the currency, right? So you have these threads coming into the mixer, and then the currency is mixed all together and spread back out again. And that's a very difficult train to follow. And finally, there's always the darknet market. So once actors feel that the currency is sufficiently obfuscated, they will move the currency into a wallet, and then they have to make a decision about how much currency they want to cash out and how much they want to reinvest into their enterprise. So the cash out process is pretty much essential still today in order for these ransomware actors to profit. It might not come as a shock that it is very difficult to use cryptocurrency in the traditional financial ecosystem. I don't know anyone using crypto like at the grocery store or to pay rent. So they would have to off-chain using a VASP, so the opposite of what I described before. And often, or mostly, these actors also hold a portion of the funds in a cryptocurrency wallet to reinvest in the business. So that could mean buying new infrastructure, reinvesting in new tools, new malware, paying out affiliates, that sort of thing, in order to grow their business. So that gives us a much more detailed picture of the ransomware kill chain, which is a great start. But in order to disrupt it, I felt we needed to add some additional layers of analysis. So I made it a circle because I can, and also because it's a cycle. And I began to add these concentric circles that indicate, so this concentric circle of white boxes are types of information that are produced at each point along the kill chain. So at each point during the process, information is produced. The people who have access to that differ. The types of information differ. I understand this is like minuscule. It is online in PDF form. You can blow it up and read it that way, hopefully. So this first concentric circle is types of information produced. And the second concentric circle are the types of entities with the ability to achieve technical visibility into those pieces of information. So essentially, the kill chain, what happens, where's the money going, what information is being produced, and who might be able to access that information or see that information. Just a quick note, the larger boxes there that you see just indicate that those entities have visibility into the entire phase of the kill chain, which are divided by those little lines. Oh, as an aside, if anyone's like a web developer and wants to make this less overwhelming, I would greatly appreciate it, so just let me know. Okay, so now we have like a pretty comprehensive picture of the payment ecosystem, which is great start. And my next job was to figure out what we can do about this. Like, where can we actually disrupt this ecosystem? And I was feeling a little bit stressed looking at this map, so I thought about ways that I could narrow down the options. And I decided to run a mini pilot, a brief definition of mini pilot for the purposes of this presentation. Mini just indicates that it's bounded, so pretty small sample size and limited to ransomware threat actors. And a pilot is just sort of an on-the-ground test of a theoretical product. So how did this mini pilot work? So we built out this theoretical map, and my question really was, what pieces of this ecosystem are threat actors leveraging? How are they interacting with the ecosystem? What are they relying on that would be very difficult for them to replicate or to do without if we as defenders were able to disrupt it? And so I reached out again to the task force and asked to be provided with TTPs, so threat actor tactics, techniques, and procedures. And the very generous task force came through for me once again. And so working with blockchain analytics folks, security researchers, some law enforcement folks, and a lot of publicly available information, I constructed threat actor, sort of like typical threat actor behavior in 4 separate cases. And in the interest of time, and also so I don't bore you, I'm just going to run through them quickly. But you can see here that some entities are in red. And that just indicates that in this particular threat actor case, the red entities are those that were leveraged most commonly by those threat actors in either preparing for or carrying out their attacks. So here are the 4 cases. Okay, and then I compiled them all into an aggregated mini pilot, which is what you see here. So everything is the same, essentially, as in the last map I showed you, with the exception of the addition of this resourcing phase, which is in the bottom right-hand quadrant. So resourcing has turned out to be hugely important, which I'm sure many folks who work in this community know already. I did not. I'm learning all the time. It's great. But in the conclusions piece, like I'll talk about this next, resourcing is actually a hugely important piece of this. So I've drawn it out here. Yeah, so again, everything in red are the places where threat actors are like typically leveraging those pieces of the ecosystem in order to facilitate and actually carry out the attacks. All right, so what did we learn? Great news, mini pilot indicated some places to start, which is awesome for me, so I'm not trying to boil the ocean. And there are a number of places where I feel we should be focusing in designing opportunities for friction in this environment. So the first piece is really to focus on the role of under-regulated and under-resourced entities. So these, I've just made everything white so you can see them more easily. But these are the pieces that you see here in yellow. And I guess of note is that most of the under-regulated pieces exist either in the on-chaining process, so where fiat currency is transferred to cryptocurrency during cryptocurrency transactions, or like within the cryptocurrency ecosystem, or during off-chaining, excuse me. And this, I think, has a lot to do with the nature of cryptocurrency generally, but also the sort of jurisdictional challenges that we face when trying to address insecurity in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. Because cryptocurrency is really transnational, anytime that a certain jurisdiction tries to crack down on cryptocurrency players within the ecosystem, those actors will just move somewhere else. So until we have sort of like a globally scoped rein-in of these cryptocurrency actors, it's going to be very easy for threat actors to just sort of pivot and move somewhere else. Okay, the second piece, as promised, is the resourcing phase. I've outlined it here with another box for you, and I'm just going to zoom in quickly. Okay, so a couple of really interesting things in my opinion, about the resourcing phase. The first piece is that when I was looking at this map, and I guess when I was making it, I noticed that there were all of these nodes attached to this slightly larger white box here. It says, I think you can read it. Anyway, it says malicious attacker infrastructure information. So in order to carry out ransomware attacks, these threat actors have to build out infrastructure. So they, just like lots of legitimate folks, lots of legitimate entities, have to purchase internet. They have to buy VPNs. They have to buy space on the cloud. And so incidentally, a lot of entities have access to information about this attacker infrastructure. And importantly, I think they may not be aware that they have that information. They may not be collecting it, and they may not be sharing it. And I think also of importance is just that these providers are not, they're providing legitimate services, right? So in my opinion, I think they would be potentially very willing to help, right? By like identifying that information and sharing it with relevant folks. So that's one piece. Another really interesting, or at least interesting to me, finding of this mini pilot is that when I was talking specifically to blockchain analytics companies about how the resourcing phase is funded, especially the malicious attacker infrastructure piece, what I learned is that it is often the case that the wallets used to pay for tools and services during resourcing are the same wallets that ransoms are paid into at the end of the day. So it turns out that threat actors are not very good at changing their wallets up. They often reuse them over and over and over again. And they use them to put obfuscated funds in, and they also use them to sort of kick money out in order to make those payments, to pay affiliates, to buy tools and services in order to carry out the next attack. So, hypothetically, in a world where blockchain analytics companies were aware of wallets that were potentially owned by ransomware actors and could share that wallet information with providers, like tooling providers, service providers, I think there's some room for progress there. Okay. Finally, a point about information sharing. Please do not beat me up in the parking lot. I know this is a trope and that people talk about it all the time, but I do have something to say. So if you look at the map in its entirety, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that there's a ton of information produced at each point in this payment process, and that there are also a ton of varying entities who sort of see a tiny piece of this really elaborate puzzle. And so if we could identify better ways to share information sort of between and among these entities and also with central actors, so like government agencies and law enforcement, I think that we could really make some good progress against this threat. This is a little teaser, but I am in the process of writing a report on information sharing in particular. I'm doing sort of follow-on research in all of these areas, so keep your eyes peeled. But essentially what I've done is map like formal information sharing mechanisms on top of this map to try and identify some gaps. I'm also looking at some case studies of like best practices and things like that. So yeah, again, I'm feeling excited about the potential to design some solutions there. Okay. Conclusions. As I hope I've shown, I feel that combating ransomware is really a multi-stakeholder effort. You see that sort of in the way that there are so many different entities involved in that process, and also, you know, in the methodology of the ransomware task force, sort of more broadly, where none of this would have been possible without folks being willing to talk to me, give me information, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm very grateful for that, and also I'm excited sort of at the opportunities that bringing all these folks together can really create. The second conclusion that I just want to really drill in on is that disrupting the ransomware business model will ultimately be the thing that allows us to disincentivize actors from carrying out attacks. We see that threat actors, ransomware threat actors, are constantly changing their tactics. They're constantly sort of like updating tools and moving to new processes. And ultimately, the goal is just to make money. And so I feel like it's a very valiant effort to try and disrupt that at a systemic level in order to disincentivize these folks from carrying out these attacks. And then finally, disruptive efforts, I think it's really important that we use this like min-max, max-min game theory principle, which essentially says that we should be focusing on the pieces of the ecosystem that are relatively easy for defenders to disrupt and relatively difficult for threat actors to replicate. So instead of playing this like whack-a-mole game of like following up on individual attacks and trying to claw money back, which is of course an important piece of the disruptive effort, I think it's important that we analyze like where in the ecosystem our efforts can best be focused in order to disrupt at scale. And very early, because I talked just so fast apparently, I am done, and I'm happy to take any questions if folks have them. I know it's late, it's happy hour time, it's okay. Any questions? In the back, awesome. Make it a long one, really long question.
Hi, thank you for all that information. So my question is, I do understand that disruption of this is very important. Should the activities be left to organizations like yours? If not, where do individual organizations, like what role do they play in this disruption activity? And if everyone is supposed to be involved, how?
Great question, thank you so much. So I think that the role that organizations like IST play, in my opinion, is really like a translation role. So my goal ultimately is to help translate like very complex technical problems to policymakers so that they can write effective, good effective policy about it. I think when we look at the ecosystem, there are absolutely different roles for different organizations. Technology folks should do their best to create secure products and should help, their customers ensure their own security that way. I also think, as a whole, as I mentioned at the end there, technologists have a lot of information, not only about threats, but also about security sort of generally that they can be sharing. And I think the government has a responsibility to, create policy around some of those under-regulated entities, for example, and also just sort of a responsibility to be a central actor that can bring all of these folks together in order to help design solutions that will actually work at the end of the day. So I guess to answer your question, yes, everyone does have a different role to play. Their specific role, I think, depends a lot on what they do and sort of the tools they have at their disposal. And ultimately, I think the information that they can share with each other and with central actors is very important. So thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'm curious, in the time that you've been doing this research, have you seen any of the yellow boxes get closer to green, meaning under-regulated, become more regulated or appropriate? Have you seen any movement in that area across the US or the world?
Totally. So I would say, like, as categories, the things that are yellow in this map are still pretty much yellow. But that's not to say that progress isn't being made. I think in the last 2 years, we've seen, tremendous efforts from the government, from, the Department of Justice and Treasury and all of those folks to, well, one, to take down some of that infrastructure, and also to sanction folks who are, part of the cryptocurrency ecosystem, especially in cases when they're really helping to facilitate illicit movements of cryptocurrency. So I think there's an acknowledgement at a very high level that this is a problem, and I think folks are starting to think about what to do about it. The trouble is just the jurisdictional piece that I was mentioning earlier, which is that as long as there are safe havens, right, for this type of activity, threat actors can just move there. So I think we need something more systemic at the end of the day.
Hi, great presentation. It was so interesting to hear about all your research. And my question was a little bit following up on his, related to what you've mapped out, and you said it's been going on for the last 2 years, your research. How much did you find that you had to change what you were mapping, or did you find that what they were doing was relatively static? Because I was thinking about going forward, how much would you really need to recreate that map, or is everything really staying within that process pretty similar across the board?
Super important question, thanks. So I think I have been really surprised the extent to which this map has remained very salient across the 2 years. We've seen massive shifts in threat actor behavior, but especially around the attack profiles in particular. And because this is focused really on the financial chain, like where the money moves, how it moves through the ecosystem, I think it's been a lot more static than other pieces of the attacker toolkit, if you will. That's not to say that things aren't changing. I think the example I gave about wallet payments, threat actors are starting, I think, and I'm not in blockchain analytics, so I'll caveat it with that, but in my conversations, I've been hearing that, perhaps folks are starting to realize that that's not a great idea. But I think in terms of the whole thing, it's held up pretty well to the test of time, which is really a testament to the RTF members who have been so great at providing me with that information. So I will keep updating it, and I have actually in my mini pilot report I made some adjustments to the original map. So thank you.
Hi. Well done. Great presentation.
Thanks.
Just a question. You mentioned there that they use the same wallets to purchase, things like bulletproof hosting, and some of those services are genuine services. So, do you think the issue is that those services don't have a know your customer type enforcement in place that actually would force them to take responsibility for who they offer those services to?
So, I think that's part of it, certainly. I think know your customer becomes really important in this ecosystem in particular because I think that these threat actors have turned to the cryptocurrency space precisely for the reason that you sort of hint at, which is that it does provide cover in a way. And I think the tricky piece is that there are legitimate providers and illegitimate providers of tools and services. So you just mentioned bulletproof hosting, which is a very specific type of hosting that I personally would not need for any reason. But some threat actors do use just hosting services like you or I might. And so I think for those legitimate folks, they do, in my research, I found that they do have pretty strong know your customer rules. I think where the KYC piece comes in is really in the sort of murky cryptocurrency space, and that's a really tricky problem to solve because know your customer sort of flies in the face of the stated goals of that community. So I don't have an answer for you on that one, but I think it's a good point. Other questions? Great.
All right. Hi, Zoe. Thanks for the presentation.
No
It's really
problem.
great.
Thanks.
I was curious, if there's a call to action that we have as, for leaders in our organization. What do you think is the next most important step for us, other than like, hey, secure your services and things like that? Like, you know, what's the run book for us going home, saying, hey, we should start thinking about A, B, and C?
Great question. I think I'll give you a lame answer and then a not so lame answer. My lame answer is that I'm still researching, so I think I'll know more like the further along we go. Again, not to just like really just go with the trope, but I think information sharing is at this point where I'm at. Like, I do think that defenders, oh my gosh, there's a bug, sorry, at a community level, have a ton of information, right? Like we know what's happening, and it's just very difficult to bridge those gaps. And so identifying new ways and like really creative ways to do that, and also sort of like prioritizing the community over the individual company at times will be very important. I also think like I love doing this research. I can't be the only one. So other folks who are like looking at malicious attacker infrastructure and the resourcing phase and all of those pieces, like I'm hopeful that this research sort of points at some directions and sort of indicates like, I think we could, like, this could be really cool if other people also want to maybe take a look. So that's kind of a non-answer, but it's the best I got for you. Cheers. Others?
Love this. Great job. Do you have enough data to guess what part of this would be the most painful for a criminal to lose?
I, as myself, don't feel that I have like a single answer for you. If I had to pick, I would say like really the resourcing piece is so critical because in my opinion, it's what allows actors to scale, because it's how they, it's like the reinvestment in the business piece that allows it to be a cycle rather than like folks having to start from scratch every time they want to attack anyone. And I think it's especially concerning to me as we see sort of AI tools come into play. So I think really figuring out how to dismantle architecture at scale, especially like the infrastructure that attackers rely on to carry out attacks, is going to be a really important place to look. Thanks. Anyone else? Hearing none? Okay, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you.